The air in the city was a thick, suffocating blanket, heavy with the exhaust fumes of 1,000 idling cars. For Liam, Maya, and Chloe, the idea of a weekend getaway was more than a luxury. It was a desperate plea for escape. For months, they had pooled their savings for a quiet cabin retreat. A place so remote, it existed as nothing more than a faint pinprick on a forgotten map. The online listing promised serenity, the rustle of ancient forests, and the gentle song of a creek winding through the valley. What it failed to mention was the silence, the true heavy silence that had swallowed a whole town, leaving behind only the echo of what was once there. Their journey began with the usual high spirits, laughter echoing through the car, a chaotic playlist of pop anthems and nostalgic rock, and the promise of 3 days of total disconnect. But as they ventured deeper into the countryside, the world seemed to drain of its lifeblood. The brilliant green of the trees faded into a muted, sickly gray. The blue sky above, once so vast and clear, became bruised with heavy, low-hanging clouds. The final isolated gas station they encountered felt like a portal to another dimension, a point of no return. The attendant, a gaunt man with eyes that held the weight of a century of worry, squinted at their destination on the faded paper map. "A dream shade," he said, the name a whisper that barely left his lips. He looked up, his gaze distant and unnerving. "Folks don't go out that way anymore. Haven't for a long, long time. There's nothing left out there for you." Liam, ever the voice of reason, chuckled nervously. "We're just looking for some quiet, sir. Nothing to worry about." The man's expression didn't change, his face a mask of weary resignation. He simply handed them their change, his hand trembling slightly, as if warding off an unseen chill. The final stretch of road was a trial. The cracked asphalt gave way to crumbling gravel, flanked on both sides by a wall of dense, skeletal trees that reached for the sky like gnarled, bony fingers. The dying sun was a final ember, its desperate rays struggling to pierce the gloom. They found the cabin just as dusk settled, a weathered structure of dark, rotting wood perched on a low, overgrown hill. Its windows, dark and empty, looked like the vacant black eyes of a forgotten god. It was exactly as the pictures promised, isolated, rustic, and profoundly unsettling. Inside, the cabin was a tomb of cold and damp earth. A thin layer of dust coated every surface, and the air was stale, heavy with the scent of old paper and decay. When Liam finally flipped the breaker, the lights flickered on with a weak, unsteady hum, casting long, dancing shadows. A constant draft, like the breath of something sleeping, snaked through the floorboards, chilling them to the bone despite the thick wool of their sweaters. "Anyone else feel like we're not alone?" Maya asked, hugging herself tightly, her voice barely a whisper. Her sensitive nature was often a source of teasing from her friends, but now her voice held a genuine, unmistakable tremor. "It's an old cabin, Maya," Liam said, trying to sound reassuring, though his own heart was beginning to thump with an anxious rhythm. "It's just settling." But the cabin didn't just settle. It seemed to breathe, to sigh, and to wait. That first night, as the wind howled outside with the desolate cry of a wolf, they heard a faint, persistent scratching from within the walls. It was not the hurried scuttling of a mouse, but something with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if a long fingernail was dragging itself down the wood. The low buzz of the ancient refrigerator seemed to morph into a low, indecipherable whisper, just at the edge of hearing, a garbled echo that promised to reveal itself if they only leaned closer. Chloe, who had fallen asleep first in a state of exhaustion,
Chloe!
sat bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror. "I heard something," she whispered, her voice cracking. "A voice, right outside my window. It said my name, Chloe. It sounded like a little girl." Liam went to the window and peered out into the impenetrable darkness, but saw nothing but the twisted silhouettes of trees against a starless sky. "It was just the wind, Chloe. A dream. Go back to sleep." The next morning, the air in the cabin felt even colder. As they prepared a quick breakfast, Maya stumbled upon it, a small, leather-bound journal tucked away in a dusty bookshelf, wedged between two moldy volumes. The pages were brittle and yellowed, the ink faded to a ghostly brown, but the handwriting was frantic, its final entry smeared with what looked like a dark, rusty stain. It was the account of a man who had once lived in Dreamshade. He wrote not of its beauty, but of its slow, deliberate decay. Not from neglect, but from a creeping, insidious fear. He wrote of the silent ones. They came in the dead of the night, the journal read, the words scrawled in a shaky hand. They did not come with violence nor with noise. They just walked away with the townsfolk. One by one. They didn't go far. They are still here, in the woods, watching, mimicking. You can't tell who they are until it's too late. When they look at you, their eyes are just empty. No light, no soul. A vacant blackness that holds the abyss within it. They wear their faces and they repeat their words. A perfect imitation. But they are not them. They are never them. A cold dread, heavier than any they had ever known, settled deep in their stomachs. They tried to laugh it off, calling it an old folktale, the insane ravings of a hermit who had spent too long alone in the woods. But the account felt too real, too raw, too terrifyingly specific. They made a collective, unspoken decision to cut their trip short. As they piled back into the car, throwing their bags in haphazardly, a figure appeared at the edge of the woods. It was a man, standing perfectly still, his head tilted unnaturally to one side, as if listening to a distant, unheard sound. He was too far away to make out any details, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was overwhelming. Liam fumbled with the key, his fingers slick with sweat, but the engine only coughed, sputtered, and died with a sickening finality. Panic seized Chloe, a wild, irrational terror that eclipsed all reason. "It's him! It's one of them!" she shrieked, and without a second thought, she threw open her door and ran, disappearing into the dark, shadowy woods as if pulled by an invisible hand. "Chloe, no!" Maya screamed, reaching for the empty space where her friend had just been. A moment later, they heard it. A high-pitched, piercing sound, a perfect imitation of Chloe's scream. It was so real, so full of terror, that it could only have been her. But the scream was followed by a silence that was even more chilling and final. A silence that felt absolute, as if the forest had swallowed the sound whole. They scrambled back into the cabin, slamming the door shut and barricading it with the few pieces of furniture they could move. The cabin was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage, and the forest outside was a beast with teeth. They were now at the very heart of Dreamshade's silent terror. Then, they saw it. At the window, a face. It was Chloe's face, smiling, her expression a haunting parody of her usual bright grin. Her hair was perfectly a mess, just as it had been when she ran, but her eyes were a vacant, terrifying black. They didn't reflect the last glimmers of light from the setting sun. They held no glimmer of life, of recognition, of any soul at all. She raised her hand, waving at them, her gesture a perfect replica of her own, a casual greeting from a soulless horror. Another figure appeared at the opposite window, and it was the man from the gas station. He too was smiling, his lips stretched into a disturbing, unnatural grin that showed a row of two perfect, pearly white teeth. He raised a hand and waved a slow, deliberate wave, a low, raspy whisper, a mimicry of the wind that had howled all night, seemed to seep through the walls. "It's just the wind, Chloe," it said, in a voice that was a perfect, distorted echo of Liam's own voice, turning his own words against him. Liam and Maya huddled together in the center of the cabin, their hearts pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against their ribs. They were alone, trapped. And they knew, with a horrifying certainty that chilled them more than the constant draft, that the silent, smiling figures outside weren't just watching them. They were studying them, absorbing every detail of their essence, every tick, every mannerism. They were preparing to wear their faces, to steal their voices, and to join the silent, nameless ranks of Dreamshade's forgotten. The last sounds they would ever hear would be their own voices, calling to them from the dark, a final, chilling farewell. The journey from the suffocating city to the sprawling green expanse of my grandmother's provincial home was one I had made countless times. The old, familiar hum of the engine, was meant to be a comfort, a lullaby on the long drive. But tonight it felt off, a low, guttural vibration that resonated deep in my chest. The moon, a mere sliver of bone, offered no comfort, its light swallowed entirely by the thick, knotted canopy of trees that lined the unlit highway. The air grew heavy and thick with an unnatural stillness, smelling not just of the usual damp earth and petrichor, but of something else, something sharp and metallic, akin to ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with the musty, sweet scent of old secrets and forgotten things. It was the smell of a place holding its breath. The trouble began just as the last of the roadside shacks, their windows dark and vacant, disappeared behind me. A violent lurch, a shriek of tortured rubber, and a dull final thud echoed through the oppressive quiet. My car, a faithful old sedan I'd named Stella, groaned to a halt. A flat tire, in the middle of nowhere? I checked my phone. The screen remained stubbornly blank, displaying nothing but the ghost of an antenna icon. No signal. My breath hitched in my throat, a cold knot of panic tightening in my stomach. The profound darkness was no longer just the absence of light. It was a living, breathing entity, a physical weight pressing in from all sides, its silence a deafening roar. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig, was amplified 100-fold, a symphony of unseen eyes watching from the deep shadows. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, its feeble yellow beam a mocking challenge to the profound blackness. The spare tire was in the trunk, but when I opened it, my heart sank. The jack was nowhere to be found. I must have forgotten it after the last time I'd used it. A cold dread, sharper than the night air, began to set in. The idea of sleeping in the car until morning was ludicrous. The isolation was too intense. I had no choice but to walk. My grandmother's village, I reasoned, couldn't be more than a few kilometers away. I just had to get to the main road, to civilization. As I started down the road, my footsteps scuffing on the loose gravel, a figure emerged from the shadows up ahead. An old man, hunched and shuffling, with a face so deeply lined it looked like a topographical map of sorrow. His traditional farmer's hat was pulled low, obscuring his eyes, but I felt them on me, piercing and ancient. He didn't seem surprised to see me, as if he had been expecting a visitor. "Lost, are we?" he rasped, his voice a dry whisper that scraped against the silence, a sound like rustling dead leaves. I explained my predicament, my words coming out in hurried, nervous bursts. The old man listened, his head tilted slightly, his movements deliberate and unsettling. He pointed a gnarled finger, thick with age and dirt, toward a narrow, overgrown dirt path I hadn't noticed before. The path was barely visible, a shadowy fissure in the wall of green. "At the old road," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Saves you a mile. Quicker to Quarry Tree from here." He paused, and for a moment, I felt his gaze on me, even though I couldn't see his eyes. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, colder. "But heed my warning, child. Stay on the path. Never, under any circumstances, stop at the crossroads." He turned and shuffled back into the darkness, a ghost made of shadow. My mind, still processing the shock of the car trouble and the disorienting darkness, dismissed his warning as an old-timer's superstition. A mile saved was a mile saved. I thanked him and, with a new sense of urgency, plunged into the shadowy embrace of the old road. The path was far more treacherous than it looked from the entrance. Twisted roots snaked across the ground like grasping fingers, and the air grew colder with every step, the dense foliage blocking out what little moonlight there was. The scent of ozone intensified, now mixed with the sweet, sickening smell of decay and something floral, an impossible perfume in this desolate place. I walked for what felt like an hour, the distant, eerie hoot of a nocturnal bird, my only companion. The path meandered, each turn looking identical to the last, and a growing sense of panic began to worm its way into my mind, whispering that I was hopelessly lost. Then I saw it. The crossroads. It was not a grand intersection, but a small, unmarked divergence in the path where two barely there trails met. And at its very center stood an ancient, gnarled kauri tree, its immense, serpentine roots coiling around a structure I initially mistook for an old shed. As I got closer, the flashlight's feeble beam revealed the unsettling truth. It was a dilapidated two-story house, its wooden planks rotted and peeling, its windows hollowed out like vacant, skeletal eyes. The kauri tree had swallowed it whole, its roots now the very foundation of the haunted structure. A soft, mournful tune drifted from the house, thin and ghostly. A piano, its notes thin and distorted, as if played by fingers that weren't quite there. I remembered the old man's warning. Never, under any circumstances, stop at the crossroads. A voice in my head, a frantic primal scream, told me to turn back, to run, to forget about the shortcut. But a morbid curiosity, a foolish, city-bred hubris that believed in logical explanations for everything, held me in place. The music was so strange, so haunting I had to understand. The front door of the house creaked open on its own, a slow, agonizing groan of wood against wood. A light flickered inside, a sickly yellow glow that danced between the gaps in the rotted planks. I took a hesitant step back, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. A woman's figure appeared in the doorway. Her head tilted, her hair a long, dark cascade that hid her face. Her dress was an old, tattered white garment that seemed to flow and writhe in the faint light, a thing of its own. She raised a hand, a single skeletal finger beckoning me forward. "Come inside," a voice whispered in my mind, a chilling multi-tone chorus. "We've been waiting." The sound of the piano grew louder, its rhythm now a frenzied, maddening waltz, a macabre invitation. I saw another figure and another, and then a whole collection of gaunt, shimmering forms emerging from the house. They were dancing in the ghostly light, their movements jerky and unnatural, their limbs twisting into impossible angles. Their faces were empty, featureless voids beneath the shadows of their long, dark hair. The air was now so thick with the smell of decay and the scent of that impossible floral perfume that it burned my nostrils and made me feel dizzy. The waltz was a siren song, pulling me closer. Fear, pure and absolute, took hold of me, a physical force that drove out all rational thought. This was no superstition. This was real. I dropped the flashlight, its beam now a small, forgotten circle on the ground, and ran, heedless of the twisted roots and sharp stones that tore at my shins. I didn't look back, but I could hear it. The waltz of the dead followed me, a relentless, mocking rhythm that faded only as I burst back onto the main road, gasping for breath, my lungs on fire, and my legs screaming in protest. The silence of the main road was a welcome relief, but it felt hollow. I stumbled and fell, my legs giving way beneath me, scraping my knees on the asphalt. I lay there for a moment, listening to the distant, blessed sound of an approaching car finally reaching my ears. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed myself up. My car. Stella. She was still there, sitting exactly where I had left her. But as I got closer, I froze. The tire was fixed. Not just inflated, but perfect, as if it had never been flat in the first place. The memory of the violent lurch and the dull thud felt like a fever dream. Shaking, I fumbled with the key, got inside, and locked the doors. My hands trembling so violently I could barely turn the ignition. As I pulled away, my eyes were drawn to the dashboard. Lying on the passenger seat, in the exact spot where I had dropped my phone, was a single silver-rimmed thimble. It was my grandmother's. She had given it to me years ago. I hadn't seen it in months, and I certainly hadn't brought it with me on this trip. The chilling, distant sound of the unseen figure's waltz echoed faintly in the air. A final, terrible farewell. The kauri tree had claimed its tribute. The journey was over, but the haunting had just begun. The clock on the dashboard had long since passed midnight, its pale green light a lonely beacon in the pitch-black void of rural Ohio. My phone had died an hour ago, the screen now a blank, black rectangle, and the last bars of service had vanished with the sunset. I was relying on a printed-out map, a relic from a bygone era that now felt dangerously inadequate, that Mark had given me with a casual wave of his hand. "Don't worry, man, it's easy," he'd said. "Just follow the gravel road after the old county line. Can't miss it." I hadn't expected the final 10 miles to be a descent into a tunnel of trees, so thick they blotted out the stars and moonlight, creating an inky blackness that the car's headlights could barely penetrate. The road was nothing more than a gravel trail, pockmarked with ruts and loose stones. The constant crunch of my tires was the only sound, besides the ragged hum of the engine, a lone machine struggling against the oppressive quiet of the night. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a fleeting procession of skeletal branches and gnarled roots that seemed to writhe and reach for the car. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something musty and vaguely sweet, like overripe decay, a smell that clung to the air and settled in the back of my throat. I rolled down the window, a nervous habit, hoping for a breath of fresh air, but a wave of cold hit my face, carrying with it a chilling stillness that felt unnatural. The trees seemed to lean in, their limbs like clawing fingers, their presence not just visual but felt, as if they were watching me pass. A sign, barely visible in the glare of the low beams, materialized on a fence post. Whisper Creek, private property. Below it, scrawled in faded red paint that looked disturbingly like dried blood, was a single unsettling word: beware. A shiver ran down my spine, but I laughed it off, a forced, shaky sound that felt hollow in the silence. It was probably just Mark's dad, trying to spook city folk. Mark always had a dark, morbid sense of humor. This was exactly the kind of thing he would find hilarious. But as I rounded a sharp bend, the laughter died in my throat, replaced by a cold knot of dread in my stomach. Standing in the middle of the road, directly in the path of my headlights, was a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, shrouded head to toe in what looked like a tattered, dirty canvas bag. It didn't move. It didn't acknowledge the car's presence. It just stood there, facing the tree line, its head tilted at an impossible, almost broken angle. My foot slammed on the brake, the tires locked, and the car skidded to a jarring halt just a few feet from the figure. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. Was it a prank? A scarecrow? My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. I leaned on the horn, a desperate, blaring sound that ripped through the quiet, a futile attempt to shatter the horrifying stillness of the scene. The figure didn't flinch. Its silence was more terrifying than any movement could have been. I held the horn down for a full 10 seconds, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, then let go. The ringing in my ears was deafening, but in the sudden quiet I watched, my breath caught in my throat, and then so slowly it seemed to defy time, the figure's head began to turn. It wasn't a human turn. It was a mechanical, grinding rotation that seemed to have no neck to pivot on. It turned a full 180 degrees, the canvas bag shifting just enough for me to glimpse a pale, featureless shape where a face should have been, a smooth, bone-white surface without eyes, nose, or mouth. A low guttural sound, like a broken phonograph needle dragging across a cracked record, scraped its way out of it. It wasn't a voice. It was a sound of immense, unbearable sadness, a keening, mournful wail that seemed to carry all the sorrow of the world within its static-filled rasp. It was a sound that made me want to weep for a loss I didn't even understand. I threw the car in reverse, my foot trembling on the gas pedal. I didn't care about the map or the gravel or the ditch I was swerving toward. I just needed to get away. I backed up 100 feet, the sound of the engine a roar in my ears, then spun the car around in a clumsy three-point turn and floored it. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. The figure was gone, vanished, as if it had never been there. I didn't slow down until the gravel road gave way to asphalt and the trees thinned out, replaced by familiar-looking fields and the vague shapes of farm buildings in the distance. Just ahead, I saw the flickering yellow light of a porch, a faint, welcoming glow in the endless dark. The farmhouse, Mark's place. Relief washed over me in a dizzying, nauseating wave. I pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and stumbled out, my legs weak and shaking, my heart still racing. The porch light was coming from an old kerosene lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on the front steps. The farmhouse itself was dark, all the windows black holes. The front door was ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze, creaking on its hinges. I walked up the 3 steps, my hand raised to knock, but something stopped me. The smell. It was stronger here. The sickeningly sweet scent of decay mixed with something metallic like old blood and rust. It was a smell that made my stomach clench. "Mark!" I called out, my voice cracking, the name a whisper against the vast silence. No answer. Only the gentle creak of the door. I pushed the door open, the wood groaning in protest. The air inside was heavy and cold, thick with the same cloying metallic scent. The living room was a mess, furniture overturned and splintered. A chair lay on its side, its legs snapped clean off. A small wooden table was shattered, its pieces scattered across the floor like a broken puzzle. The silence was absolute, a profound lack of sound that felt wrong, as if the very air was holding its breath. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light spilling in from the porch, I saw something in the corner. A pile of old canvas bags, identical to the one worn by the figure on the road. They were stained with dirt and grime, and they seemed to absorb the light, turning the corner into a deeper pocket of shadow. A faint sound came from the kitchen, a dragging, shuffling noise. It was wet and heavy, like something being pulled across a floor. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot, a morbid curiosity overriding my primal fear. "Mark, is that you?" I whispered, my hand now reaching for the door, my fingers fumbling for the knob, preparing to run. The dragging sound stopped. The silence returned, more menacing than before, charged with a horrifying anticipation. Then, a low, rasping whisper, so close it felt like it was in my ear, slithered into the silence. "He's not here anymore." I whipped around, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing just behind me in the doorway leading from the kitchen was a familiar figure. It was Mark, but not quite. His face was a pale, expressionless mask. His eyes were wide and empty, fixed on the ceiling, a vacant, lifeless stare. He was wrapped in a tattered canvas bag, and his limbs moved with a jerky, unnatural rhythm. His head tilted at the same impossible angle as the figure on the road. The sadness from the road was in his empty eyes. And then he raised a hand, pointing a trembling finger to the rafters above. My eyes followed his gaze, and I saw it. A dozen or more tattered canvas bags, hanging from the wooden beams like macabre effigies. They swayed ever so slightly in a breeze that didn't exist. And in the center of them all, tied by a rope around its neck, was my friend Mark's old, worn-out hiking bag. The very same bag he had carried on every trip we had taken since college. It was his trophy, his remnant, a sign that he was no longer a person, but another one of them. The front door slammed shut behind me with a sickening thud. The house was no longer silent. From every corner, from the shadows in the living room and the kitchen, the low, grating whisper began to rise in unison, a chorus of broken phonographs. "He's not here anymore. We are."